Picture this. It's past midnight, the interstate hums like a lullaby, and your gauges glow soft green. You swing off the ramp, and there it is. A warm neon promise of hot coffee, a booth that remembers you, and a plate big enough to anchor a ship. These diners weren't just places to eat. They were mile markers in a working life. Let's roll through 10 real truck stop diners that live rent-free in every driver's memory. If there was ever a place that felt like a living room for the highway, it was Dixie Trucker's home. It opened in 1928, starting as a humble sandwich stand, and for decades it was the heartbeat of Route 66. Truckers knew if you stopped at Dixie, you'd find more than fried chicken and pie. You'd find somebody you knew already sitting in a booth, probably halfway through a second cup of coffee. The walls carried stories of blown tires, missed exits, and rookie mistakes that became running jokes. Drivers swore the pie could keep you awake longer than a fresh log of hours. I once heard a driver say he only stopped for a quick bite and ended up talking shop for 3 hours. That was Dixie. It wasn't just a stop. It was a checkpoint for the soul, where the food filled you up and the company kept you rolling another 500 miles. Before you roll on, hit that like and subscribe button. Because the next diners on this list aren't just pit stops, they're legends with stories you don't want to miss. And the 7th one on our list could very well be your favorite. Truckers on I-25 knew this spot for one thing: cinnamon rolls that could double as spare tires. Johnson's Corner started feeding drivers in the 1950s, and it quickly became the place where you didn't order one roll unless you had a plan to nap afterward. More than one rookie thought they could finish a whole one before hitting the road again, only to realize they'd just eaten their weight in sugar and dough. The diner had a special kind of warmth too. Waitresses remembered names, refilled your coffee without asking, and always seemed to know when you were running on fumes. Old-timers joke that Johnson's served more trucker therapy than food. And they're not wrong. If you had a bad day, you'd leave lighter, even if your stomach was heavier. When the restaurant shut down in January 2025, drivers everywhere felt the loss. For many, it wasn't just about cinnamon rolls. It was about a sense of home on the road. Cruising across the I-80 can feel like driving through an endless painting of sagebrush and sky. Then, like a neon oasis, Little America appears. This wasn't just a fuel stop. It was a 24-hour diner that could make you forget the miles behind you. The burgers tasted better at 2 in the morning than they had any right to, and the soft-serve cones became famous in their own right. Truckers used to say, if you didn't stop for a cone, were you really even in Wyoming? It was also one of those places where you swore you'd just grab coffee and ended up with a full plate of hot food and maybe an extra slice of pie for the cab. The parking lot was so big, some joked you needed a map just to find your rig again. For decades, Little America has been the kind of stop where the road feels less lonely and a booth feels like a blessing. For years along I-80, the R Place family eatery was a beacon for drivers who wanted more than fast food. It sat right inside the TA in Morris, but stepping into the diner felt like walking into a hometown kitchen. The bakery case alone could stop you in your tracks, loaded with giant cookies and pastries the size of dinner plates. Truckers bragged about the breakfasts, the kind that would carry you through an entire shift without a single snack break. One driver told me he used to plan his fuel stops around the R Place meatloaf special, swearing it tasted just like his mother's. When it closed its doors in December 2024, you could almost hear a collective groan across the interstate. For many, it wasn't just the food. It was the friendly greetings, the endless coffee, and that comforting feeling of being a regular, even if you only rolled through a few times a year.
Hi.
Inside the world's largest truck stop sits the Iowa 80 Kitchen, a dining hall that has been feeding road warriors for decades. Drivers will tell you the place isn't subtle about its portions. The buffet on a Sunday morning could put even the hungriest driver into a food coma. It was the kind of spot where a rookie thought one plate was plenty, then ended up waddling back for seconds because the mashed potatoes were calling. Old-timers still joke that you could fuel your rig and your belly in one stop and both would last 1,000 miles. The big dining room was always full of chatter, a chorus of drivers swapping stories about loads gone sideways or dispatches gone missing. For many, Iowa 80 wasn't just the biggest truck stop. It was a reunion hall where you always ran into somebody you'd crossed paths with before. And the coffee? Let's just say it was hot enough to keep you honest behind the wheel. Long before chain travel plazas started popping up, Boise Stage Stop was already serving up hearty meals and hot coffee to anyone tackling I-84. Dating back to the 1800s, it had roots as a real stagecoach stop, which gave the place a sense of history that you could feel in the wooden walls. Truckers loved the menu because it was honest food. Burgers, steaks, and breakfasts that came in portions large enough to share. Not that anyone ever did. More than a few drivers admitted they stopped here just to hear familiar accents and catch up on local chatter. One old hand swore that Boise Stage Stop's steak and eggs saved him from quitting trucking on a particularly rough winter run. There's something about a plate of food in a place that has been feeding travelers for generations. It felt less like eating out and more like being looked after. And that's something every driver misses. Tucked inside Jubitz, which some call a truck stop city, the Cascade Grill was always the crown jewel. Drivers could roll in after a long wet run through Oregon and count on comfort food that stuck to your ribs. The menu had everything from prime rib to chicken fried steak, and the breakfast lasted all day for those who swore by bacon, as a form of therapy. One driver told me he once stopped in just for soup and somehow left 3 hours later, stuffed and swapping fishing stories with strangers. That was the Cascade Grill. It wasn't just about what was on the plate, but about the atmosphere. You could sit down alone, and by the time your coffee cooled, you had two new friends talking about axle weights. It was a trucker's living room, the kind of place where you never felt rushed, even if dispatch was breathing down your neck through the phone. Right off Interstate 65, the Tennessean's restaurant had a reputation that stretched further than the buffet line. It was a 50-year institution where drivers found more than food. The waitresses greeted you like family, and the plates came out loaded. Truckers joked the fried chicken had enough grease to lube an axle, but nobody left a drumstick behind. The pies were just as legendary, the kind of dessert that made you forget you were behind schedule. A rookie once admitted he stopped there just for coffee and ended up spending his per diem on a full spread and a slice of banana cream. The Tennessean's real charm was the sense of care. You rolled in beat from the road, but within 10 minutes you felt looked after, like someone's grandma was making sure you didn't leave hungry. Even now, drivers talk about it with a kind of pride, like belonging to a club that doesn't hand out memberships anymore. If you've ever heard the viral blooper about buttery, flaky crust, you've met Dysart's in spirit. But long before the internet had its laugh, Dysart's was a trucker's staple off I-95. The restaurant served up big breakfasts, hot chowders, and enough bakery goods to stock a cab for a week. Drivers say if you were hauling through a Maine winter, stopping at Dysart's was as important as chaining up your tires. You'd warm up twice, once from the coffee and again from the chatter. Truckers swapped storm stories, compared loads, and maybe grabbed a whoopie pie or two for the road. One old-timer swore Dysart's had saved marriages by sending drivers home with pies instead of excuses. It's still running strong, but the nostalgia comes from all those years when it was more than just a meal. It was reassurance that you weren't alone on that frozen stretch of highway. The Keystone was one of those small-town gems where you knew the food was going to be good before you even sat down. The lot was always full of rigs, and that was all the endorsement anyone needed. Inside, you'd find country breakfasts, meatloaf dinners, and service that felt more like hospitality than business. Drivers joked that Keystone hash browns had enough grease to keep a Peterbilt humming, but they'd order them every time. A few even swore by the place as their reset stop. parking for hours just to catch up on rest while nursing bottomless coffee. What made it memorable wasn't fancy menus or neon lights. It was the comfort of a booth, the rhythm of trucker conversations in the background, and the way the staff seemed to know you even if it was your first time there. Keystone wasn't just fuel for the body. It was a reminder that small-town kindness still lived along America's highways. Now, truck stop diners were never just restaurants. They were rest stops for the soul. They gave drivers warmth, conversation, and plates big enough to carry you through another 100 miles. Some are gone, some remain, but everyone left a mark on the highway. Which diner do you miss most? Share it in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more trucking stories.